everyone. I'm Heena Patel, the Marketing and Communications Director at Equal Justice Works. We are here for another installment of the My Impact Alumni Series, this time with Brittanny Gomez, a 2018 Equal Justice Works Fellow who served in our Disaster Recovery Legal Corps. So we're here today to talk with Brittanny about how an Equal Justice Works Fellowship launched her career and to hopefully inspire some more students to follow their passion for public service and equal justice. So thank you, Brittanny, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Of course.
So let's get started. Did you always want to be a lawyer and pursue a career in public service?
Yeah, as cheesy as it sounds, as long as I can remember, I have wanted to be an attorney in some form or fashion. I would say my direction towards public service really kind of got narrowed down by attending St. Mary's University School of Law. They have a really, focused curriculum on public service and getting out in the community and doing that kind of work. And so I participated in our, veterans clinics as well as wills clinics. I was a student attorney on our criminal justice clinic, and then ultimately, during law school, I had several federal government externships with the JAG Corps and the Federal Aviation Administration. And so I think all of that kind of helped me when getting my first job as an attorney at the U.S. Small Business Administration, doing disaster loans, that in connection with my personal experience with disasters.
It's great to hear. It sounds like you're very busy during law school.
Yeah.
So how did you find out about Equal Justice Works and what motivated you to apply for a fellowship?
Yeah, so I knew about Equal Justice Works from law school. Like I said, doing a bunch of different public service work, it's obviously going to come up. And so when I was working at the Small Business Administration, I ultimately decided that I wanted to kind of switch focus and instead of working for the federal government, start representing individuals impacted by natural disasters. My family has experienced natural disasters my entire life growing up. And then as I was applying for jobs for the SBA, my family lost their home to Hurricane Harvey. So after working a couple of months at the Small Business Administration, I was doing some Google searching and saw that EJW was hosting a fellowship at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid for the Disaster Recovery Legal Corps. I had worked with TRLA in law school doing all of those clinics. And so I applied and I was so grateful to have gotten the job. It was really the perfect fit for me. It really allowed me to kind of go back to something that I was personally familiar with and take my newfound legal ability and apply that in a way that I could help individuals that were kind of living through something that I had once experienced in my life.
Thank you for sharing that personal connection of your lived experience, your family's lived experience, specifically with Hurricane Harvey, and really how that motivated you to apply for the program. During the program, you worked alongside 22 other fellows to really help provide critical legal services to families that were impacted by disasters in Texas and Florida. Can you share a bit about how you leveraged the connections you made with fellows in the program?
Yeah, in a couple of different ways. I was really fortunate by working at TRLA that EJW had a handful of DRLC fellows within my organization. So that really allowed me to kind of work either as counsel or co-counsel on some cases with fellows and share, detailed client information back and forth, which really allowed us to kind of expand and work with work across cases that way. But as for, working with fellows in Florida, in Houston, in areas where that are outside my service area, the DRLC had conference calls where we would all get on and talk to each other, as well as we would convene for leadership development training in DC, and we went to Kentucky at one point for Equal Justice Conference. And so we took those opportunities as a core to get together in person and really discuss, overarching trends that we were seeing happening within these disaster agencies. If a particular issue was arising with FEMA in Florida, Is it something that we're also experiencing in Texas, or is this maybe localized? Kind of what's going on there and how can we dissect that? And then really working with the fellows and collaborating on, how to build community partnerships with various disaster volunteer agencies and organizations that come into play, as well as long-term community partners that may have been established but are now responding to disasters, and then coming up with plans and strategies and alternate strategies on how to engage in community education and outreach in a meaningful way that will be impactful for the particular community that you're serving.
That's great to hear. I think that really speaks to the unique nature of this specific fellowship model and how it allows you the opportunity to really leverage the knowledge and connections of other fellows in the program to really best serve the needs of people affected by disasters. So I was going to ask, what was the most exciting part of being an Equal Justice Works Fellow? Can you share some highlights from your time in the program?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this twofold, right? So doing public service work, your work is always focused on the clients and the impacts you can have in the community. And obviously, some of the greatest moments I've had in my career so far have been, helping some of my clients who may have been, in repeat systemic issues with disasters, repeat flooding, or maybe a veteran or somebody along the line, just kind of get back up on their feet. I've had several cases where I was able to work and get people brand new homes. And those cases are obviously really helpful. But I think, when you work with a disaster survivor, it's not necessarily one legal issue. It's not just FEMA. It's not just, a title clearing problem. I've had several cases where I worked with the individual for over a year, sometimes 2 years, to really try and get them back in a position where they at least were. Maybe it wasn't better. Some cases they were better. Others it was just getting them to where they were, and seeing the impact that makes on a individual level is really a great feeling, especially when, as disaster survivors, they get burnt out. And so sometimes, as an attorney, you're not just being their lawyer, you're being their advocate. You're also sometimes being their cheerleader, being, saying, we can keep going. We really can. I'm not giving up on you. Let's do this together. I really think we can make this work. And so that's obviously been one of the highlights. And then as for working with the core members, I think one of the most exciting things that has come from the DRLC, at least for me personally, is I've established and made new friends. Again, that kind of sounds cheesy, but it's true. Disasters have a way of really bonding people together. You're dealing with clients who have experienced trauma. Sometimes you're experiencing secondary trauma by going out and doing that in-person community outreach and seeing the devastation of your client's home when you're walking around. So making those friendships, but not just with the core fellows, but also with Equal Justice Work staff. I can say that I have lots of friends within the EJW organization. I've truly enjoyed, working with the staff that were assigned to the DRLC. I talk to most of them and the alumni, weekly, if not daily in some cases. So that's really been a great experience that I just continue to enjoy even years after my fellowship.
That's so nice to hear. I was going to say also, I think it's just great to hear about all that you've accomplished as a fellow, especially in supporting, individuals who are dealing with a multitude of issues that come up after a disaster. As someone who's really made a lasting impact on the communities that you've served, are there any words of advice that you can give to new fellows who are actually going to begin their 2-year projects later this month?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and I can almost say almost any new attorney is going to say that, is embrace what you don't know, right? There's no point in faking it until you make it. Just if you don't know it, you don't know it, and really find great mentors and really invest that time in identifying exactly what you don't know, and then kind of working to gain that knowledge. Working in disaster, type of law, that's not something that's really taught in law schools right now, but you can take classes that kind of form the foundation of that, right? You can focus on a housing clinic maybe, or an environmental justice class or clinic. There's several of those around the country, as well as just taking your general administrative law course at law school. It's not something that's generally tested on the bar, and I know it's very important, obviously, to get to the point where you can be an attorney, you have to pass the bar, but sometimes it's okay to take a class that's not bar specific that you might actually benefit you in your career down the line. I never thought I would be doing administrative law. I did take that class. I enjoyed it. And here I am. It's what I do every single day now. So really kind of laying that foundation and kind of branching out from your traditional law school courses, and then, finding that great mentor within your organization or not. Maybe they're on a court, maybe they're just another Write Your Own Equal Justice Works fellow that is doing something similar to your project. Reach out to them. It's great to have someone to lean on when going through this process.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. I think it's just so important to reiterate, the effort to build and maintain those connections, and just how critical it is to take advantage of like all the different learning opportunities that can come your way as a fellow. So I wanted to just transition just a little bit and chat about your post-fellowship path. You've done incredible work. You've done such impactful work during your time as a fellow to really help communities that have been affected by disasters. And then in your current role at Texas RioGrande Legal Aid. So I wanted to see if you could just talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at TRLA.
Yeah, so again, I'm really fortunate to be able to work at an organization like TRLA that has an established disaster team. The team existed well before I joined on, and I got to add on to it and kind of expand capacity. I'm now the disaster benefits team manager. So I manage a team of 10 attorneys, paralegals, and law clerks, even in Equal Justice Works Rule Summer Legal Corps fellow currently, who work on natural disaster issues as well as some man-made disaster issues. We, do various things. We do FEMA appeals when they're there. When they're not there, we focus on long-term recovery issues like clearing title to disaster survivors' homes so that if a disaster hits again, when a disaster hits again, they will be in a much better position to get access to those federal benefits, or to maybe get a more full recovery so that they're not, systemically getting further and further into debt, or the repairs on their home are getting worse and worse because of these storms. So, the work I was doing as an Equal Justice Works fellow, I'm still doing every single day at TRLA, and it's just a great, meaningful opportunity. I've also been able to expand a little bit into some other areas that also impact disaster survivors. I work on, or I'm learning, you never really stop learning as an attorney. I'm learning more about construction, theft cases, and deceptive trade practice cases that impact disaster survivors. That's something that is unfortunately rampant after a disaster in some of our communities. And so working more on wills and estates issues so that we can preserve those assets for disaster survivors and their families in the future.
I think it's just great to hear how you're building on that knowledge that you gained as a fellow to help you, continue your work advocating for disaster survivors. I think you mentioned it, disasters are becoming more increasingly frequent, and I think we just need more lawyers like yourself, more passionate lawyers like yourself, who can really ensure that communities have access to the legal services that they need to rebuild their lives. I think for students who are interested in following a similar career path, are there any lessons that you've learned during the pandemic that you think might be helpful to share with them?
Yeah, I think, we always said it before, disasters impact multiple areas of law. COVID-19 really just confirmed that in a way that, is expansive. There is almost no area or practice area of law that has not been impacted by the coronavirus disaster. And so with that, I would just say, as a new lawyer, as a fellow, as, an established lawyer, it is really important to take some time and focus on what your individual disaster plan will be, whether that's for you personally or for you if you go into private practice or within your organization. Maybe you find a need within a legal services organization that you work for later down the line. Establishing a disaster plan that, you can't plan for everything under the sun. Maybe an alien invasion, who knows, murder hornets were a thing at some point last year, but really try to come with an all-encompassing disaster plan. As my old boss used to say, better is, or done is better than perfect. So something, get it written down, because if you can make sure that you as an organization or as an attorney are taken care of really quickly, then you can turn around and use your ability as an attorney to provide services to the community at large. And that's really what's important, right? As an advocate, you need to be able to advocate, and you can't do that if you're trying to figure out what's going on, how to do Zoom hearings and things like that. We've all learned, so let's write it down. And then really just always kind of keep an open mind about different, training courses, or maybe picking up a new practice area. It's better to learn something not in a disaster context, but there's no time like the present, right? So if you've always been curious in housing, but you do family law, maybe reach out to your housing team, managing attorneys, or reach out to maybe take on 1 or 2 cases. I'm sure they'll be very appreciative for the help. And then also know that, in a crisis, you might be able to help with some of those cases as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just really important to also just remain resilient in the face of challenges as a public interest leader. I think you touched on this, but through your work, you're not only helping to ensure an equitable recovery for disaster survivors, but also helping communities understand the importance of preparedness. So this month is National Preparedness Month, so I wanted to definitely take the time to ask you about ways that lawyers and law students can really increase awareness about disaster preparedness.
Yeah, community education and outreach is always, a number one. And in a pandemic, it's slightly harder. People are, a little burnt out at this point with Zoom and trainings and things like that. But as a law student, and even as a new attorney, looking for those training opportunities are really helpful to kind of have at least a basic understanding of what goes on after a disaster occurs. That way you can be able to communicate that to the community. You can always look to volunteer your time with legal service organizations, whether that's during your fellowship. Obviously you would be doing that part of your fellowship, or even in the aftermath if you do go on beyond your fellowship and go into private practice. It's really important to, maybe volunteer your time, take a pro bono case. And I know it's really daunting to try a new area of law. Like I said, it's really hard to learn it in a disaster because everything's so chaotic. But if you're an expert in wills, or you're an expert in consumer litigation, then taking pro bono cases that from legal service organizations that can be handled in your area of expertise frees up other attorneys to be able to help with those FEMA appeals, those fast deadlines, and things you don't necessarily have to start fresh learning from. You can do something you're comfortable with and familiar with, and it will be a tremendous help to legal service organizations. But yeah, just really taking that self-evaluation time and figuring out if you are prepared for a disaster yourself, because if you're not, then you can't really help anybody first, right? There's that phrase in legal aid that you hear all the time, you got to put your oxygen mask on first, then you can help others. It's the same for disaster preparedness.
Thanks for sharing that information. I think those are really good ways to really increase your understanding about disaster preparedness, so that you can actually increase visibility about disaster preparedness. It doesn't sound like they're a heavy lift either for lawyers and law students. So those were all the questions that I have. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to take the time to thank you again for speaking with me. It was an absolute pleasure learning more about what motivated you, and hearing about all the incredible work that you're doing. And then just on behalf of Equal Justice Works, just grateful for everything that you're doing to support disaster survivors. So thank you, Brittanny.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Equal Justice Works, for giving me the opportunity to do it in the first place. So it's a really, really great program. I know it's the disaster resilience program now, but I encourage anybody who has a curiosity about disaster work to definitely look into those programs.